Hello guys, welcome to today's session. Today we'll be going forward with our banking application API. The functional requirements we'll be doing today is for ability of registered user within our system to be able to transfer money from one account to another. That is account to another in the sense that, let's say you are using an app that allows registered user to transfer money from their own wallet to another user in the system wallet. So that is basically what we are going to be doing today. So to start with, we are going to head back into our code editor, and to make today's video faster, I've already created a transfer DTO that contains the sender ID, the sender account ID, the recipient ID, the recipient account ID. Then we have um, the amount that is being transferred to from the sender to the receiver. Then we have the status, we have the reference, and we have the created at and updated at. This DTO is retrieved based on the transfer model itself. So so let's get into work. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to our transaction, our account service interface, and I'm going to add the transfer the transfer method to it. So in order to accept a transfer, there are some couple of things we are going to need. We need the sender account number, right? Then we need the receiver account account number. Then we need the amount being sent, which could either be an int or it could be a float amount being sent. Then we need the description 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 of the transaction. So this will also be a string. This will have a null. So that we have receiver account. So this will have a default value of. So we need to implement this transfer in our account service. So I'm just going to do it right under withdrawal here. New implement method transfer. Yes. So our transfer has been implemented. So in order to initiate a transfer, there are some couple of things we must do. So I'm just going to copy the block of code here. So I'm going to remove all of this, and I'm going to, so we can set minimum withdrawal for in-house transfers to like 300 or something. So to start with, the first thing we need to do is to retrieve the sender account number. Yeah, or the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure the receiver and the sender and the receiver account number is not the same thing, so that anyone that is making use of this method is not making a mistake to give us the sender account number and receiver account number as the same thing. So just outside, we are going to check if the sender account number is equal to the receiver account number. If that is the case, then I'll throw an exception, new exception. Uh, uh, Let me call it same. You can say receiver, 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 and sender account number cannot be the same. So we are here. We've made sure that the sender and receiver account number is not the same thing. So the next thing we are going to do now is we are going to create a query for retrieving our sender account query and receiver account query. So let's start a transaction. So we are going to initiate this in a transaction. So let's say sender account query equals to our model query, where account number is equals to sender account number. So I think this spelling is wrong. Number. So this should be receiver account query. Receiver account query. Receiver account number. So now this is the query we'll be using. So the first thing we want to check is we want to make sure the two account number actually exist. So we are going to say this dot accounts exists. We pass in the query receiver. Then we also want to check if the sender account number exists. Sender account number exists, right? I mean, sender, yes. So once that we have that in place, if our code goes beyond this, then that means the validation for checking if account exists has been passed. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to retrieve a locked version of the sender and the receiver account number. So I will just copy the code up here and paste here. Let me copy everything together. Then I'll copy and paste as well. So this will be locked sender account. So that will be sender account query. Then locked receiver account. That will be receiver account query. So what we are making sure is we are trying to prevent race condition. In a situation, we don't want to make sure that the nobody else is able to actually update any of these accounts until we are done and we've actually released the accounts. So copy Yes. So now that we have that in place, the next thing is we want to check if the pin, um, one thing that we didn't accept from our information, from the information we, as in our interfaces, we did not accept the pin of the sender, or pin to validate that whoever is sending the uh let me call it sender account pin. We need to make sure that the pin being supplied is actually valid. Right? So we can just copy this. I'll just copy this, and let me initialize this as a string. So I will just copy this, replace with what we've implemented initially. So that should sort us out. Okay. Now we have the pin, sender account pin. So once we have those two accounts, the next thing we want to do is validate the pin that was given to us by uh, the sender sending money to the receiver. So we want to check if this, let me just copy that particular section from our code. So we want to check if the sender accounts, the sender, so okay, let's retrieve the DTO. Let's retrieve the DTO. Let's retrieve the both of them DTO. So this will be, let me just copy this, locked. So this will be locked sender accounts DTO, and this will be received, yeah, received accounts. So this will be receiver account DTO. So we want to get the sender account DTO user ID. We pass it into our validate pin, and we check if the pin supplied here, the sender account pin, will be replaced with this. So this does the validation to be sure that the person that is trying to perform a withdrawal, the pin he or she has supplied is correct. Otherwise, we are going to throw this, our exception, invalid pin exception. So the next thing we want to do now is we want to create or generate a transaction DTO for both our sender and receiver. You know, for the sender, technically the sender is performing a withdrawal. For the receiver, technically we are going to register a deposit transaction for the receiver. So that's what we are trying to do now. We are trying to generate transaction for them for. So I will just copy. I'll create a new transaction DTO. So we are going to come here and do this. So this transaction DTO. So the account DTO here, we generate for the sender first. So the sender account DTO. So let's generate a withdrawal DTO here. So to generate a withdrawal DTO, let's look at what are the things that is needed to generate a withdrawal DTO. Okay. So let's create a withdrawal DTO. Call it withdrawal DTO. So withdrawal. Let's go to our withdrawal DTO. Let's see the necessary stuffs we must supply. So we need the sender account number, the amount, the description, the PIN, and category. So, okay. So let me just go to our withdraw account controller. I'll just copy this. I'll copy this, all of this, then come to our account service, paste. So the account now will be the person that is performing withdrawal, which is our sender, right? Sender. Let's get the sender account number, get account number, then the amount being withdrawn, which is what we are accepting here. So we just pass it in, amount, the description, we also pass it here. This is the why it is good to actually create DTOs, because it will make it passing variable very easy for you. Description, then the pin that was supplied, we can pass it in, sender account pin, even though it's not needed, but let's just pass it for prosperity's sake. Or let me go to the set pin method. I'm not sure it's optional. It's not optional. So let's just leave it be since we have it. So now we can easily pass our withdrawal DTO into the can withdraw, and we can create our logged account DTO will be. So basically what we are doing here is we are checking if this user can actually perform a withdrawal. If the user cannot perform a withdrawal, an insufficient balance or something is thrown. So now that we've done that, the next thing we want to do is we want to then generate a transaction DTO for both the receiver and the sender. Remember I said for the sender, we are going to register a deposit or withdrawal transaction. And for the receiver, we are going to create a deposit transaction. Withdrawal for sender, deposit for receiver. So now this is for withdrawal. So we need to do one for deposit. For deposit. So the deposit is expecting an account DTO. So let's call this transaction withdrawal DTO. This one will be transaction deposit DTO. So our stuff is complaining, description is missing. So let me just copy the deposit stuff. Deposit, this is withdraw, this deposit. So let me just copy this. Let me just copy this section that I need. This part. Paste. So we need the receiver account DTO, receiver account DTO, then the deposit DTO too, we need to generate it. So let's go to our account deposits, account deposits controller. So we just copy this. All we need is to copy this and come to our account service. Then we paste. Where is our transfer? Yes. So we just do that right after this. So our account number will be the account number of the receiver, right? On the logged accounts receiver gets accounts receiver DTO is DTO that I'm looking for. Receiver DTO. So that will be gets the account number. Then the amount is already being supplied. Amount. Then this description is being supplied as well. Description. So now that we have the deposit DTO, we've passed the amount and we've passed the description into our deposit DTO. Remember, let's move our can withdraw upward. Okay. We need it right after the withdrawal DTO has been. Okay. So now we have these two slots. I think we can move this upward. Then I can move this here. Let's our initialization be in the same thing and our settings be on the same level. So we have that in place now. So the next thing we need to do now is we need to also get our transfer DTO. So to generate our transfer DTO, all we need to do is create a new transfer DTO. Let me just create it here. Let me say transfer DTO, a new transfer transfer DTO. So in order to set our transfer DTO, we will need some parameter. So transfer uh, uh, so in order to set our transfer DTO, so that will be transfer DTO. We need to set the reference. Remember, we have a way that we are generating reference. So our reference is the uh, transaction service generate reference. Then we need to set the user ID. Set uh, the sender ID. I mean, the sender ID will be dollar logged accounts sender accounts detail get user ID gets user ID. Then we need to set the um we need to set the sender account ID. Set sender account ID. That will be get ID. Then we need to do the same thing for receiver as well. Send receiver account ID. That will be receiver account DTO. like so, like so. So receiver, then we need to change this to set receiver account ID. So we have set, let me just give this space. So we have set the sender ID, we have set the sender account ID, we have sent the recipient. What we want to send is the recipient, set recipient ID. We have set the recipient ID. So now we have our transfer, then we need to set the amount that is being transferred. Transfer detail, set amount, plus amount being transferred, right? So now we are set on our transfer detail. So what we are going to do now is we are going to then call an event for both. So the first event we want to fire is the transaction event. We know it has two listener, right? It has two listener. It has the withdrawal listener registered to. Let me just quickly go to our app event service provider. Event service provider. Our transaction has the deposit listener and the withdrawal listener. This is what we are going to use to register our transaction, our deposits and withdrawals. So if you check the deposit is checking that the category is type deposit. So what we are going to do now is we are going to initiate an event for both deposit and withdrawal this thing. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to pass. So the first event will be for the sender account DTO. Then we are going to set the logged sender account. Then we are good. Then we are going to do the same thing for the receiver account DTO. Then we are going to set the logged account for the receiver account. Now, the difference will be on the type of transaction that we are sending. So for withdrawal, we are going to pass in this, and for sender, we are going to, for the receiver, we are going to pass in this. So this is of type deposit and this is of type withdrawal. So with that done, the next thing we need to do is the next thing we need to do is register the transfer. And the reason why we are doing the transfer is for analytical sake. Tomorrow we might want to get everyone that has actually transferred, from one person to another. That is why we have in our transaction table, we have this transfer, we have uh, the transfer ID to know if it is actually a transfer. So what we are going to do now is we are going to um, create a transfer, and we are going to update it with the necessary items or necessary parameters. So in order to do that, the first thing we are going to do is we need to create a transfer service. So let me just create that new file. Or do I really need to create a transfer service? Do I really need to create a transfer service? Okay, let's just create a transfer service. So another mistake that I made is we are generating transaction reference for a transfer DTO. So I'll need a transfer service actually. In the transfer service, I'll be generating the transfer DTO. So let me create a transfer service. So our transfer service will also have a transfer interface. I'm just going to pause the video and quickly set that up. Then we will run through it. So welcome back, guys. So I have created some methods that will be needed for our transfer service interface. So the regular method, as we have been doing, is a method that we can easily use to retrieve a query builder for our models, then a method to create a transfer, and a method to actually to also to get transfers between two accounts, then a method to generate a transfer reference, then a method to get a transfer by ID, a method to also get a transfer by reference. So the method has been implemented in our transfer service. As you can see, I've implemented the get transfer by ID by basically so what we are doing here is we are checking for in the transfer model to see where the ID is equals to the past transfer ID. And we are also checking here to see where, based on the reference that is passed, we are checking our transfer model to check where there is a reference that is equals to the supplied reference ID. So if we check our, just to a revision, our transfer ID contains the sender ID, the sender accounts ID, the recipient ID, recipient accounts ID, then the reference, which is what we are querying. We are what we are using to perform this query. So let me just say transfer with supplied reference not found. Yeah, so basically, so what we are going to implement now, I intentionally left this for us to implement together. So in order to create a transfer, we can already see in our columns. Let me just put the columns by the side. No, I mean transfer, sorry. Let me just put the columns by the side. Yeah. So to create a transfer, we are going to need the transfer. Let's say transfer query. We don't even need that. Let's say transfer equals to this model dot create, right? So the first we need the sender ID, which you can retrieve from our this dot I mean transfer DTO dot get sender ID. We need to retrieve the receiver I mean the receiver ID. That will be get receiver recipient ID. Then we need these two. We need the sender account ID. Should be sender account ID. I mean get sender account ID. Then get recipient account ID. That will be recipient recipients accounts ID. Recipients, this should also be recipients, not receiver. Recipients account ID. Now that we have that in place, then we need to accept the reference, of course. Reference. reference. Then we need to retrieve then our status status loading transfer DTO DTO. Let's get status. And then the amount as well. I'm just putting space in between so that it will be quite easy. Let me put this in presentation mode. Sorry. Yeah, sorry, I apologize. So, okay, it will be easier for people on small screen to see now. Get amount, get amount. I always forget. So what we've done is we are trying to create a transfer. Then we are supplying the sender ID, the recipient ID, the sender account ID, the recipient account ID, the reference, the status. So the sender ID here is basically the user that is currently the user that owns the account, then the recipient that owns the account, like so. So let me just remove the spaces now. We don't need those spaces. Those are just there for illustration purpose. Then we can return the transfer. Just quickly copy this, paste. This is just to tell the the code editor what we are sending to stop querying us. So now that we have that in place, we can then go back to our transaction service. Yes. Oh, no, transfer service, sorry, transfer uh, yeah, account service, sorry, account service. So as you can see, so far what we've done is we've created a query for the sender account, like so. Then we also got the check if the sender accounts exist. We also checked if the receiver accounts exist. Then we got a locked version of our we retrieved our sender account and locking it for updates. We retrieved our receiver account and locking it for updates. Then we converted the locked sender account to an account DTO. We converted the receiver account to an account DTO as well. Then we validated the PIN. Then we created new instances for transaction, withdrawal, deposit, and transfer. So we set the needed items for deposits. We set the needed item for withdrawal. Then we check if the sender can withdraw. Then we create a for withdrawal transaction DTO. We created a for deposit transaction DTO. So what is going to happen here is, in as much as we are using the same instance, the necessary stuffs are going to get overridden. So we should not worry the fact that we are using the same instance. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a transfer, which is now going to be this. We need to import the transfer service, or we could create an event. Let's create an event. Let's create an event, but let's do it first before we create an event. So transfer service. Let me just import the transfer service into here. Private read-only transfer service, then transfer service. So transfer service, then create transfer. So we pass our transfer DTO. The service will be the transfer will be created. So once the transfer is created, we want to actually get, we need to actually update the transactions that we created in this event. We need to, let me think about this. In order for us to, we need to be able to, we need to be able to update the transactions that actually occurred on both, on both, or for both the withdrawal and the deposit with their respective transfer ID based on what we've actually set on a table base. So if you check our table, check the transactions column, we'll notice that we have that transfer ID there. And I already said it that we are going to create a transaction role for both deposit and withdrawal. So the easy way to get that is, the easy way to go about that is to thinking what we can do in our transaction events. Let me check the transfer listener, listener, oh, I mean, transaction withdrawal listener. Sorry, withdrawal listener. This is where the transaction is being created. So we are going to need the transaction that was created and update it with the required stuff based on the generated reference, of course. So what we can do is to what we can do. So what we are going to do is we are going to create the transfer just before calling the event on transaction event. Because if we check our transaction details, if you check our transaction detail, they both reference the transfer ID. And the reason why we've not used it since is because we've not performed a transfer. So what we are going to do now is after creating the transfer, we are going to set the transfer ID. So let's do that. Let me go to transaction. Let me go back to our account service. So right here, just after creating, we've already, so what we are going to do is we are going to, on the transaction withdrawal DTO, we are going to set the transfer ID, set transfer ID, transfer, let me say transfer the ID, right? We are also going to set, sorry, we are going to set the transfer ID on the transaction deposit DTO as well. Transfer ID. So since at this point we've set the transfer ID, so by the time they get to the event, we will know that it has been set. So if we go to our, let's start with our withdrawal event, and withdrawal listener, I mean, withdrawal listener. So at this point, what we are going to need to do is update the transfer ID of the transaction. So what we are going to do is we are going to go to our transaction. I'm going to create a new method in our transaction and say, sorry, Control Z. So I'm going to come here and call update. I'm going to call this update transfer ID. So we are going to pass the reference and we are going to pass the transfer ID. So this will be an int. So anywhere, so instead of this will be transfer ID. This will be transfer ID, right? So that is all we need to do, right? So anywhere this reference is present, the transfer ID will be updated. So we can then go ahead and go to our withdrawal listener, and call the transfer on it. So what we are going to do is we are going to say if dollar event, our event transaction DTO dot get transfer ID is true, that is, it is set, then we are going to update the transfer ID. We are going to pass the, so this will be update transfer ID. Say event get event transaction DTO get transfer ID. We are going to do the same thing in our deposit listener. Yes, transaction reference transfer ID. So Vowler like that. So at this point, we know that the transaction will have been created. Then we are basically just updating the transfer ID if it is set. Otherwise, we will not be updating it. So what we are going to do now is, I believe we are good now. Let me go to the accounts service. I think we've done everything but tests. So we've done everything but test. So let's go to our controller now. Let's create a controller. Let me open up. Let me open up API. So we are going to need accounts. We are going to need we can use our transfer controller. I believe we have a transfer controller. Yeah. So we can use our transfer controller. So function store. So this will be public, of course. So we are expecting a request. So let's generate a request. Yeah, make request, transfer request, request. So now that we have that in place, we are going to go to our transfer request and accept the necessary parameters that we must accept transfer. So our transfer request, set this to true. Then for this, we are going to need the receiver of the money being transferred, receiver account number, account number. Then we are also going to need the amount being sent. We are also going to need the PIN of the sender. Then we are also going to need a description. Description is not a necessity description. So this should be nullable. And this is a maximum of 200 characters. 200 characters. So our PIN will be required. It will be a string, and it must be a minimum of 10, or a minimum of 4 characters. Then we need amount required. Then it must be numeric. It must be a number. Then a minimum of, let's say, 300. That's the minimum you can transfer. So we can even say 10 already, although we already have. Let's just leave it. Then we need, this is required. It must be an integer, or let's make it a string. Receiver account number is an account number. It will be an integer. So we are then going to go to our controller, transfer controller. We are going to accept the transfer request. The next thing we will need to do is we need to try to recall what we need to do. Okay, now we need to initialize our transfer, right? So the first thing we need to do is get the sender account number. And we know the sender is basically the person that is currently authenticated in the system. So we get the user, then we're using the user ID, we are going to get the account, the sender account. So we are going to say sender account equals to this get account. Okay, we need to need a controller public, and we need to be able to get using the account service public, and make it private read only account service. So we need the account service to get accounts, or let's say get accounts by ID, get accounts by user ID. Is that implemented? Yes, it is implemented. Let's go back to our transfer controller. Account by ID, user ID, right? So if we are able to retrieve the sender account, the next thing is we want to call the transfer. This account service transfer. So the transfer we are making of the sender account. So the sender account number, let me just put this on another line. Sender account number, the receiver account number, request, input, receiver. Let me just go to our request. Transfer controller, receiver account number. Then when you transfer, the next thing is we need the account pin. Request fields in request fields. The transfer is expected amount. Then the description. The description. So now we get the transfer detail. Transfer detail. So the next thing we want to do is we want to return transfer detail. Set success. Send success. Say accounts transfer successful. Or we can say account transfer in progress. So transfer DTO transfer. Yes, there is transfer. Transfer DTO. So now that we have that in place, let's go to our API. Set up the necessary. That's strange. Okay. Transfer. Then we have the transfer controller. Replace. So we store. So we can go to our postman. Let's try to perform a transfer. Transfer. So our base URL, then account transfer. Then we supply the bearer token. We hit the endpoints. We get a validation error. Okay, there should be a post request, of course. We get a validation error. I'm just going to copy this into the body. So replace with the actual value. So let's go to our database, or let's just impute a random account number for now to be sure that our validations, our exceptions are being thrown. If I pass in something that is not money, then the let's say name, blah, blah, blah. Let's send it. You see, amount field must be a number. So let's try to transfer so much money. Invalid account number. Brilliant. So let's check our accounts, which account numbers. Account number. Okay, this will be in our accounts table. So we don't have any other account number. So let's create another user and generate account number. So let's call it another user we try to hit, email already exists. Another user. So let's just change this to 9. It's no user account created. So if we come here, then we need to generate the account for the user. We need to log in with this user. Let us log in. Yeah, we are logged in. So onboarding, let's generate an account number. Okay, we need to set up a PIN. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just use the same PIN. Let's validate that our PIN is correct. Our PIN is correct. Let's generate account number. Okay, we have an account number now. So currently this person account is even 0. So they are both on 0. So let me just use these accounts and deposits. I'm going to deposit some money into this user account. Let me say 3,000. You could not undo your request. Something happened. So let's check what is causing the failure. So the place I usually go is let's go to our log. Go to trace connection error. Transfer ID must not be accessed before initialization. So this is happening in transaction DTO 104. Transaction DTO 104. 104. So let's see what's going on. Let's go back to our log. So this error was thrown at 104, but it was thrown inside the deposits events. Let's see where, yeah. So let's go into our events, or withdrawal. Which one are we firing first? Which one is deposit listener? Let's go into the deposit listener and see. Okay, get transfer, return transfer ID. Papa. Okay, let's go to our account service. Account service where we are performing our transfer. Let's see what we have. Our transaction deposits ETO. Let's hit it. Is it one throwing errors right before we got here? Oh, we go. Let's see what happens here. Are we in the right? Let's get our transfer. Let's see deposits here. What happens? There's not even happening here. So here, withdraw. Oh, I mean deposits. Okay. I understand what is going on. So the reason why this error is being thrown is because during the process of depositing, we are not setting the transfer ID. So if we go to deposits, so let's just look for deposits method. So this is where the issue is coming up. Transaction. So let's do this transaction DTO. Let's hit it up. So we see that our transfer ID is not being set at all. At all. So what can we do to actually set our transfer ID? Um, so what we can do is for deposit, let's just set the transfer ID. Since it can accept no, set transfer ID to eliminate that error. Our set transfer ID should be able to accept no. Okay, let me go to deposit detail. Okay, we set transfer. Let's go to our accounts, service, deposits, and just pass no. So let me come here to withdraw to not pass no. So that should solve our issue. So now, yes, our transfer is going through successfully now. So let's go to our account service again. Account service, deposits. So now that our account is going through, let's see, you can see the 3,000 has been deposited. So we can try to then transfer to this user using our newly registered user. We can perform a transfer. So let's transfer to a good account number. What's the account number of this guy? So copy. Let's try to send money that we don't have. PIN is invalid. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Insufficient account balance. So we are trying to withdraw more than what we have. So if we pass 70, we are getting we could not undo your transaction. Let's see what is causing that. Logo. Let's go to our logo right at the end. So typed property status must be assessed before initialization. So we are not setting our status. Let's go to transfer controller. Let's perform a transfer. We are not setting status for our transfers. So let's just set status. Let's say status, my battery is low. So transfer DTO. Let's just set it. Let's say status. Let's say success for now. Since we are not using any third-party service anyway. So let's set it to success. Let's come back. Let's try to account transfer in progress. Transaction DTO. Transaction. Okay. It is the transfer DTO that we are supposed to. The reason why we are getting empty object is because we only initialized the transfer here. We didn't go ahead to set the necessary stuffs. So let's do this. So let's just send the transfer instead of that. So let's update. Or we can send transfer detail. Transfer DTO. Yes. So this will be transfer DTO. Transfer DTO. Then in our interface, we need to update our interface to be transfer DTO, transfer DTO. Yeah. So let's try to perform another deposit. We are still getting empty. That's surprising. So let's go back to our transfer. Our transfer detail. Set. Path post it here. Say transfer detail. Mesh flow. Transfer detail. Okay. So what we need to do is we need to say transfer detail. Uh, let's see what happens here. We are not returning the keys, so transaction. Transaction. Oh, detail. Setting all of this guy. So the reason why our transfer is returning an empty object is because we did not convert it to something that our response JSON can actually serialize. It's not serializable. So what we can do is, let's go to API, transfer controller. So I've removed the sending. For now, we'll just have that. So let's check the user account. Let's check the DB and see. Can see our transaction is not being registered. Our transaction is not being registered. Oh, okay. It's been registered. I'm going to transactions. Okay, brilliant. So as you can see, this is the amount of times I've actually hit withdrawal and deposits for the accounts. So we can see for every time we make a withdrawal, a deposit is done inside the other user accounts number. So withdrawal deposits. If we check our transfers as well, we can see the sender is all of this is being registered. But I made a mistake. I want to change how we are actually generating the transfer reference in the account service transfer reference, set reference for transfer. So I want it to be the transfer service generate reference. So let me try to hit that again. Good. So let me check the transfers. So TRF, this is what so you should update your code so that we can differentiate between a transfer reference and a transaction reference based on the prefix. So that will be the end of today's session. I hope you enjoyed it and you picked one or two things on how to debug and how to perform transfer between two accounts within a system. There are different ways to actually perform this. They could supply their username instead of supplying account number. There are so many ways. So I hope you enjoyed it. And if you enjoy it, please share with your friends, family, so that they can also learn. Please, if you are able to, if you enjoy it as well, please hit like button, subscribe. I really appreciate all of this. Actually encourages me to go on and on. So in the next session, we'll be moving to um the ability for our users to be able to see their transaction history and be able to filter through either they want to see a deposit transaction or a withdrawal transaction. Then after that, we are going to give them the ability to actually download their transactions. So there is more to come, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.